Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to break down one of the absolute most jaw-dropping moments of the 2026 World Cup so far. Seriously, if you love a good underdog story, or, if you're just fascinated by those crazy tactical shifts that can completely flip a football match on its head, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're looking at a game that completely defied expectations and totally rewrote the history books.
Right off the bat, I'm going to spoil the ending for you. Ivory Coast beat France. And not only did they beat them, but they secured their first ever win against the French national team. I mean, on the biggest stage imaginable. The stakes here are absolutely massive. We've got a traditional footballing Goliath in France, packed with global superstars, going up against an Ivory Coast team that just completely refused to read the script. So, you're probably wondering, how did Ivory Coast actually pull off their first ever win against the French? Well, let's break down the tape and the tactical shifts that made this historic giant slaying a reality.
To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this comeback, we've got to start right at the beginning. Act 1, the Goliath.
Okay, so picture the absolute chaos of that first half. It was just overwhelming, suffocating French dominance. I mean, right from the opening whistle, France applied immense offensive pressure. We saw Kylian Mbappe doing his thing, displaying his trademark magic touches, just effortlessly weaving through the midfield. You had Aurélien Tchouameni stepping up with some incredibly dangerous efforts from distance. And, kind of interestingly, Adrien Rabiot, who we usually think of as a more defensive-minded player, was constantly getting involved in the attack, forcing multiple saves. But standing incredibly tall in the face of all this was Ivory Coast's goalkeeper, Yahu Fofana. He was catching shots cleanly, turning things away, and honestly, single-handedly keeping his team alive during this early storm.
But hey, it wasn't an entirely one-way traffic. Even while they were absorbing all that insane French pressure, Ivory Coast showed these incredibly dangerous flashes on the counterattack. The real standout moment came from Simon Adingra. He breaks right through the French lines and unleashes this massive chance that honestly looked completely destined for the back of the net. It required a fantastic, totally desperate fingertip save from French goalkeeper Mike Maignan to turn it just around the post. So the key takeaway here is that while France was absolutely dominating possession and shot volume, Ivory Coast was sending a very clear warning. If you leave yourselves open at the back, we are absolutely going to punish you.
Well, that warning definitely kept the tension high. But as we move into Act 2, the deadlock breaks just before halftime.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how you break down a stubborn defense. Watch this three-step sequence for Rayon Cherki's sublime goal. So we're in stoppage time of the first half, and the ball finds Cherki in a terribly crowded penalty area. First, he executes this perfectly timed little drag back, which just completely freezes the defenders. Second, he gives Fofana the eyes, looking one way to completely throw the goalkeeper's momentum off. And finally, he delivers a splendid, clinical finish right through the crowd and past Fofana, who realistically could do absolutely nothing about it. It was just a goal of pure quality from a guy the commentators rightly called a pure entertainer, breaking that deadlock right on the stroke of halftime.
Now let's contrast the vibes in the two locker rooms at the break. For France, they're leading 1-0, they've dictated the pace, and they're feeling pretty comfortable. But for Ivory Coast, instead of crumbling, they completely regroup. The manager makes these massive tactical changes for the second half, most notably bringing on players like Nicolas Pepe and Ibrahim Senghore to inject fresh energy, speed, and just entirely new problems for that French defense. These subs were specifically designed to completely flip the momentum of the match.
Which brings us to the final thrilling chapter of this story. Act 3, the upset. This is where those tactical adjustments take hold and the magic happens.
The second half just explodes into life when Guela Doué levels the match. The commentary on this goal was absolutely fantastic. Doué finds himself with a critical opportunity and delivers what they called a supreme striker's finish. He drags the ball one way and sends French defender Ibrahima Konate literally slipping and sliding completely out of the play. Then, he gives the keeper the eyes and beautifully slots it right into the opposite corner. It was an absolute masterpiece of composure under pressure. And to make the whole thing even more cinematic, he did it all while his younger brother Desiree watched on. Suddenly, the giant is staggering. We are tied up at 1-1.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the raw human emotion captured by the commentators. They called it sheer undiluted joy in the stands. When Doué's equalizer hit the back of the net, that stadium completely erupted. It wasn't just a goal, right? It was this sudden realization that the impossible was actually happening. The Ivory Coast fans were in absolute ecstasy, and that wild energy poured straight from the stands right onto the pitch, giving their players this massive second wind for the final stretch.
And that brings us to the final push. Remember Nicolas Pepe, who came on as a sub? Well, he made a real immediate difference. He was constantly on the charge, making these super dangerous runs that just terrorized the exhausted French defense. France actually tried to respond by bringing on their own prodigy, Warren Zaire-Emery, trying to claw back control of the midfield, but man, the momentum was entirely orange by this point. Pushing deep into over 5 minutes of stoppage time, the pressure is mounting, the ball breaks, and Ahmed completely turns it around for the deciding winner. It was just a stunning climax to a relentlessly physical second half.
Let's move to and see how this builds across the whole fixture. Just over 45 minutes in, right at the break, Turkey makes it 1-0 for France. At that point, you think Goliath is just going to march on, right? But then, in the second half, Doué pulls Ivory Coast level with that absolute beauty of a finish. And finally, deep into the 90-plus minutes, Ahmad seals the unbelievable 2-1 victory. It's a perfect representation of a team that simply refused to quit, steadily clawing their way back into the game minute by minute.
And there it is. The final whistle blows on a truly historic outcome. Ivory Coast beats France for the very first time in their history. The celebrations in the stadium and, back in Abidjan were just monumental. The whole narrative of this invincible French squad was completely shattered. It proves once again exactly why we play the games. Honestly, it doesn't matter what the stats say before kickoff. Tactical discipline, heart, and a perfectly executed second-half game plan can slay the biggest of giants on the World Cup stage.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. So, what does this massive upset actually mean for the rest of the 2026 World Cup campaign? For Ivory Coast, it's got to be an unbelievable injection of confidence, right? They now know for a fact they can beat literally anyone in the world. But for France, wow, it's a harsh wake-up call. How are the favorites going to bounce back from this historic shock? The whole tournament has been blown wide open, and the rest of the world is certainly watching. Thank you so much for joining me to break down this incredible match, and keep following along, because if this game was any indication, we are in for an unforgettable